Bioshock is the kind of franchise that will give people extremely strong opinions about every kind of Bioshock release. Strong positive opinions, strong negative opinions, but there's one final Bioshock release that I had never played. The Burial at Sea DLCs. Hi, Jarek here, and I'm at the bottom of the ocean once again. Please ignore that I can breathe down here, and please ignore that I have the ability to do this. The strong opinions I heard about Burial at Sea were a lot more negative than the positive ones. Admittedly, this is definitely a case of the negative ones being louder than everyone else, as typically is the case, but I was hearing more of them than usual, even for Bioshock. So I had one question. How bad are these DLCs really? Well, it's split into two different parts. They both function as their own sort of standalone expansion, not like a typical DLC you would see. Almost reminds me of an old-fashioned expansion pack. I actually like part 1 quite a bit. Part 2, I'll just come out and say it, I think this thing sucks. Let's start with the story, then go to gameplay for each DLC. Since the can of worms has been opened that is infinite timelines, you play as Booker DeWitt in another timeline. The game starts with Elizabeth, of all people, knocking on your door.
Well, you got a name, miss?
Elizabeth. You can call me Elizabeth.
What can I do for you?
There's a girl who needs to be found. Maybe you've seen her.
This girl.
I actually quite like this version of Elizabeth a lot more than base Infinite's version of Elizabeth. Not really a huge fan of the whole Disney princess vibe and going overly wholesome. It's not even necessarily written poorly, but I think most people's response to that guitar song is supposed to be them going, "Oh, look how cute it is," and my response was, "Oh, get me the hell out of here." Anyway, Elizabeth is looking for a child by the name of Sally. Booker claims Sally is dead, but Elizabeth pushes on. Eventually, Booker agrees to go find this little girl. He claims this girl is not his daughter, but knows who it is well. And in this alternate timeline, you're back in Rapture. I actually love this. At first I thought it might have been that they were running out of ideas, so they went back to Rapture, but I frankly don't care. Seeing Rapture in Infinite's engine, it just looks so good. This is classic Bioshock presentation. There is so much little detail, and the added improvement to the newer engine makes it look that much better. On top of all of that, you're wandering around in Rapture before the fall of Rapture. You get to see how Rapture worked as an everyday person. You can't look at me and tell me that isn't cool as hell. It's unfortunately rather short-lived because you spend a bit of time trying to get into Cohen's club. Once you get in, you briefly meet Cohen, which I wish they did more with this character. I assumed it was going to be the villain of the DLC. If you remember, this is that one character you saw in that bit of Bioshock 1. I explained that terribly, but I'm showing what I'm talking about on screen. It's arguably the most memorable portion of the original game, so I would have liked to see more of this character. But he shocks you and then you wake up to shit, Fontaine? Yeah, so this was after Andrew Ryan already found out about Fontaine. Andrew Ryan decided to sink Fontaine's entire place to the bottom of the sea. It's been completely cut off and run over by splicers. So while the rest of Rapture is functioning normally, this place is not. But as you could have guessed it, this is where Sally is, now as a little sister. Not a whole lot happens from here till the end of the DLC, so let's just skip to the conclusion. And also skip here if you don't want to be spoiled. I'll also put chapters down below. You eventually do find Sally, stuck in the vents. So Elizabeth's idea, which Booker greatly doesn't like, is to close all the vents but one and then turn on the heating, and eventually cook her out. Booker even refuses to turn up the heating and has Elizabeth do it. You see, apparently Sally was under Booker's care at some point, but he started gambling, lost track of where Sally was, and then lost her. Now, she's a little sister. Booker understandably really wants to get Sally back at this point, which leads to this cutscene.
DeWitt.
It's okay, Sally.
Is she?
Look, it's Sarah. Huh? She's come to see you. We're going home. Do you want to go home? Don't fall, please. Don't. I'm here. I just want to take you home. I just want to.
You're hurting her.
She's got to come with me.
She's not your child.
She is mine.
Let her go. Let her go.
She's mine.
The jail is closing.
Shut it down. Shut down the machine.
You've got to pull her through.
Pull.
Shut down the machine.
No, she's not through.
Shut it down. I remember. All of it. That poor child.
She wasn't yours, Comstock.
Oh, no.
I wasn't.
No.
Yet you had to have me, didn't you?
No, this isn't right.
And when the guilt
No.
was too much,
You turn to us to solve your problem.
To provide a place to go where you might forget.
Where there never was an Anna in the first place.
Comstock was never one to own up to his errors, was he, brother?
Never comfortable with the choices he made.
Always seeking someone else's life to claim as his own.
Elizabeth. Child. I am so sorry.
no, you're not. But you're about to be.
Yeah, so Booker was not Booker. This was Comstock. And instead of only losing a pinky, the child was killed. Booker moved to Rapture to try to get away from this, try to forget what he had done. The entire reason for Part 1 existing is for Elizabeth to get revenge. Now, I actually like this. I'm perfectly fine with the story, with one really big problem. The ending of Bioshock Infinite implied that Comstock no longer existed in any timeline. So how does this one exist? If you can look over that, it's perfectly fine, and I don't mind Part 1 at all. Part 2 is where things start becoming a mess. Part 2 is a direct sequel to Part 1. It takes up exactly where the first part ended. But since Booker is dead, you can no longer be playing as Booker. You're playing as Elizabeth. Apparently, after the Big Daddy killed Booker, it also killed Elizabeth. She could open endless doors and see everything in the future, but couldn't see that. Apparently. Either way, this means that she no longer has the ability to open tears or see what is going to happen. Not that you would know that at first. The game starts in Paris, and the Disney princess thing is back. A little overbearingly so. God, get me out of here. But this quickly morphs into a nightmare, and now you're right back in Rapture. From this point on, I really have to strain my brain to remember what even happened in this DLC. It's a jarbled mess of things, most of which don't mean anything. The point of Part 2 is to try to connect Bioshock 1 to Bioshock Infinite, something I don't see the point of even doing. Anyway, you wake up to Fontaine being Fontaine and almost being murdered. However, a figment of your imagination, I guess? Booker DeWitt tells you exactly what you need to say. Effectively, you say that you can help Fontaine Industries no longer be trapped at the bottom of the ocean. You also know the solution of a problem you're unsure even exists. You don't even know what you're saying. And thus starts a wild goose chase of go grab that, go grab this, who knows what you're doing, figure it out. There's also a lot of little details in here that try to connect Infinite to Bioshock 1. For example, they explain why plasmids are vigors in this universe. Apparently, when you drink vigors, they get soaked in through your stomach lining or something. But someone in my chat raised a good question. How did Infinite avoid getting splicers then? If you still need Eve, you should still be addicted to it. This starts a long list of problems with this game, where they try to connect one thing from Bioshock Infinite to Bioshock 1, and it raises more questions and opens loopholes, and then nothing makes sense anymore. Anywho, the very short, too long didn't read, is that you go back to Columbia to grab a device that will let Fontaine Industries float back up to the rest of Rapture. You know, because they had floating buildings and everything, so that part checks out. Problem is, as soon as you come back from Columbia, Andrew Ryan has found you. He knows you're planning something, and he's done with just leaving Fontaine trapped down there. He wants everyone murdered, you included. So now not only are you trying to survive Fontaine, but Ryan's also trying to kill you. It's blatantly obvious everyone is setting you up, and Elizabeth knows that. But despite knowing that, she still helps Fontaine. Who would have known Fontaine grabs you? And this leads to one of the more disturbing cutscenes I've seen in a game.
A man named Steinman taught me this. He's a bit of a lunatic, but a fine surgeon. He calls this little trick a transorbital lobotomy. Take hold of her, lads.
You're wasting your
Now,
time.
If you won't remain still, I can't be held responsible for what comes next. Here we go. You feel that? I'm moving the pick across your eyeball, still now, and resting it on your skull. There's about a bit over 1/4 of an inch of bone between the pick and your prefrontal lobe. And that's where this little fella comes in.
I don't...
It was just a wee tap. But I don't expect it'll take more than a few of those to reach the meat. And then we might find you a bit less the mule. Where's me ace in the hole?
I don't know.
You know what else rests in the lobe? Creativity. Individuality. Personality. In short, what makes you, you.
Yeah, as it turns out, you told Fontaine that you were the lab assistant of his scientist. That leads him to believe you have more information than you actually do. And in an attempt to get that information to you, he starts doing a lobotomy to you. I don't know how I hadn't heard of the scene before. Getting a lobotomy in first person is something that would grab attention. While a lot of the rest of this DLC is a complete blur in my mind because it's just not cohesive, I remember this part vividly. You eventually get a vision, know where whatever it is he's telling you to find is, and set off to go get it. The ace in the hole that he wants is just a piece of paper with a cipher on it that says, "Would you kindly?" All he needed was the trigger word for Bioshock 1. Elizabeth basically just accepts her death. She never tries to fight Ryan, she just lets him kill her. Somehow, she's now able to see the future. See the character you're playing as in Bioshock 1. See him taking care of all the little sisters. That's her reward, and she passes away peacefully. It doesn't exactly feel very rewarding, and it also seems totally unnecessary to write this in. Did we really need things connecting Bioshock 1 to Infinite? We didn't need Elizabeth to come along and say, oh, this is actually the trigger word. They already had scientists working on it. What's the point? There's also one other thing that baffles me. I have no clue why they did this. They effectively entirely rewrote Daisy Fitzroy.
I've taken your counsel, and you done me good service, but I will not hurt the boy. I will see Fink and Comstock burn, but I will not hold the son to account for the deeds of his father.
You've misunderstood us.
We neither asked you to harm the child.
Nor did we promise that yours would be the hand that would set Comstock's world afire.
A famous man once said,
And a famous man shall say,
I may reach the mountaintop.
but I fear I shall never visit the valley below.
But you mean I won't live to see the... No.
It's up to you what matters more.
Your part in the play.
Or the play itself.
Someone is coming.
She'll arrive a girl.
She must leave. A woman.
And what makes the difference between a girl and a woman?
Blood.
Your part in the play.
Or the play itself.
Turn her into a killer? How?
Give the girl no choice.
And she will be forced to make one.
They turned her into a martyr for her own revolution? She willingly died by Elizabeth's hand? Why? This doesn't change anything. There's no reason to retcon that part. Just, why is this in the game? It doesn't even affect the direct story of Part 2. It's completely unnecessary. So, yeah. While Part 1 has a pretty glaring loophole, being that Comstock shouldn't even exist to begin with, its story is okay. Part 2 didn't need to exist. And as far as gameplay is concerned, I feel the same exact way. But you know what does need to exist? Today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is, of course, Into the AM. Fourth wall break, that's me wearing their clothes. They look pretty good, they're really comfortable, they soft, they stretch, I really do like them. It was also like 100 degrees outside and I was miserable. Yes, I know the irony behind a fire-breathing dragon hating the heat, but it sucked. Unlike the clothes, which do not. If you go to intotheam.com/dragonshirts, you can get 10% off site-wide. And yes, this does stack on top of their bundle deals. Among my viewers, their graphic tees seem to be selling the best. But overall, people need some basic tees, some pants, some coats, some shirts. They sell pretty much everything on their site, and all their clothes are really high quality. So again, go to intotheam.com/dragonshirts to get 10% off site-wide. And a huge thanks goes to Into the AM for sponsoring this video and supporting this channel so much. For real, they do a lot of stuff with me. Hell, they even sponsored one of my tournaments I ran back in the summer. Completely unnecessary, they didn't need to, they just wanted the help. They are a very genuine company, and if you want to support companies like that, I highly recommend supporting this one. Alright, back to being underwater. The gameplay of Part 1 is actually a really big improvement over Bioshock Infinite. It plays a lot more similar to that of the original Bioshock. Instead of being a linear first-person shooter, the map design is, again, like the original game. Each individual map is sort of a hub world, with one big room and a bunch of branching off paths. You're free to explore these any way you want, and with the ability to see the direction you need to go, you can explore everything else before continuing the story. It's really convenient. Hell, very early on, you'll find a new weapon. The Thompson's back. This thing looks cool. And later on, you'll find another new weapon, which hasn't been seen in any Bioshock game.
In the house.
Judging to accept less.
That splicer doesn't exist anymore. Alright, I like it. I'm fine with that. You know, a microwave gun is the most fitting thing that could have been in a Bioshock game. I don't know why it wasn't here sooner. So the map design is more like Bioshock 1, but the gunplay is more like Bioshock Infinite, which is a huge improvement. You don't have to pull out a plasmid off one hand, you can shoot and fire plasmids at the same time. And the guns are loud and punchy, and overall everything just feels better from a combat perspective. This DLC even fixed the biggest issue I had with Bioshock Infinite's combat. You can now carry more than 2 weapons, thank God! This was such a huge, unnecessary restriction in Infinite, and it's now gone. Albeit with the caveat that now you have to use a weapon wheel for some reason. Why can't I assign guns to my keys? I'm using a keyboard and mouse. It's not a restriction due to the engine, because in the second DLC, I had to redo all of my key bindings because they added the ability to use medkits whenever you wanted to. I hate weapon wheels. I hate having to basically pause the game to change weapons. It causes micro breaks in the combat and really ruins the flow. But I guess beggars can't be choosers. This is still way better than only being able to carry 2 weapons. Yeah, I actually really like what they've done here. The only problem is that it will be over in only about an hour and a half. It's a pretty short DLC. If you're enjoying this content so far, consider subscribing. I'm almost at 250k, I would love to reach that goal. Also, a huge thanks to my YouTube members. They get to see my videos as soon as I am done with them, so they don't need to wait for the weekly Friday post. Alright, back to complaining about Part 2. I do not share the same sort of love and fun for Part 2. In fact, I hated Part 2, so much to where if I wasn't making a video of it, if I didn't need to know what was going on in the story, I would have stopped playing after 30 minutes. I thought it was that bad. So in Part 2, you play as Elizabeth, not Booker. And since you can't open up tears anymore, you're a lot weaker. You know what this means? It's forced stealth time. Boy, my favorite. I was actually looking forward to playing as Elizabeth, because playing as someone that can open tears as they want and be this all-powerful creature sounds really fun. I don't know how they would have balanced that in, but I would have loved to play that. But instead, we just got Stealth the game. Now, to clarify, stealth games aren't inherently bad, obviously. You have amazing games like the Splinter Cell franchise and Metal Gear Solid. If you like stealth, that's where you go. Those games are made for that. The problem is, this game wasn't. Yeah, it's one of those stealth games. Crouch by enemies, melee them, and shoot them with a crossbow. That's the whole game. I summed up the whole experience for you. Holy shit, does this make this game so slow and so boring. I'm already not a huge fan of stealth games to begin with. I give the good ones a lot of credit because they're genuinely good games. But I don't see this as a good game. Bioshock Infinite's engine was never made for stealth. Bioshock as a game was only loosely made for stealth. It was more made for creative decision making. It was made for letting the player do what they want to do. This just plays like an extremely simplified version of Thief or Dishonored. What doesn't make things better is that enemy AI is extremely stupid. It's one of those stealth games. You get someone's attention and then 30 seconds later they're like, oh, must have been nothing, it's perfectly fine.
Can I find you?
Oh well. Classic stealth NPC behavior. You can also just sort of break their AI. They're not very smart, and the game isn't very difficult. Thank God, it would have taken so much longer if it was. In fact, most of the time, I didn't bother fighting the enemies. I didn't even want to play the game, so I just cloaked by them and ignored all the enemies. Leave them alive, keep going. Now, if you're playing a good stealth game, you'd feel rewarded for doing that. You would be able to sneak in and out of a building, be a shadow, no one knew you were there. That should be satisfying. But it's not. In this game, it just feels like you're trying to skip the content. Largely because I was. In every other Bioshock game, I made sure to explore every room I could, find all the plasmids, all the weapons, all that stuff, but in this game, I didn't want to. I just wanted to beat the game and get it out of the way. And I know I'm harping on this a lot, but there's a difference between a sudden forced stealth mission in Far Cry 3 where it insta-fails you and good stealth in Metal Gear Solid or Splinter Cell. This is closer to the first rather than the latter. Thankfully, it never insta-fails you. However, if you die, it does send you to the last checkpoint, which should be fine if the checkpoints aren't bad. I don't really know how bad they are. I only died once, but that one time I died had an annoying checkpoint. Ryan will be talking at you through this monitor for 60 seconds, a full minute. After that minute, enemies will pour in at you. This checkpoint is at the very beginning of that timer, so if you die, you just have to sit there and wait and listen to him talk all over again.
Ryan has no time.
Okay, it can still see me even though it's cloaked. That's cool.
60 seconds.
Oh my god, you can't even put a checkpoint at the beginning of when they pour in. Jesus Christ. It's like when devs put a checkpoint at the beginning of an unskippable cutscene. Just why? Enemies would also respawn as you went back into the hubs, and as someone that didn't want to fight them because they were tedious, just roadblocks in the way, I found this really annoying. Final conclusion time. Part 1, actually quite good. Feels more like Bioshock 1 level design with Bioshock Infinite gunplay improvements. Part 2, in my opinion, by far the worst thing in the entire franchise. I despise everything about it. The story is completely unnecessary, doesn't even need to be there. There's no reason to try to connect Infinite to Bioshock 1 in the way they did, and the gameplay is awful. It is so tedious and obnoxious. I've used those words I don't know how many times throughout this video, but that's how I feel about them. I don't want forced stealth in a franchise that wasn't made for stealth. I even would have had some good things to say if it wasn't just all stealth. You do get regular guns, but since Elizabeth is weaker, there's more recoil, shooting the guns is more laborious, reloading takes longer, and for some reason magazine sizes can be smaller. Also, the guns do less damage. This makes no sense. If Shaq and I fire the same shotgun, that shotgun isn't weaker with a magazine restriction just because I'm not 7 feet tall. Okay, well, Dragon is 10 feet tall, but you know what I mean. I am all for making changes that are nonsensical for gameplay purposes. But this doesn't help anyone, especially when you already have established rules within the previous game that you're a DLC of. I don't think I've ever had Whiplash this big. I streamed both these DLCs at the same time, part 1 right into part 2. I went from having fun to being miserable. And that's the Too Long Didn't Watch. Part 1 is pretty good, part 2 is f***ing awful. If you want to see me be possibly miserable in a future stream, click over there. I stream once a week. There's other stuff around here. If you want to watch some other videos, I have a whole playlist of all my stuff. Check them out. Thank you guys for watching. Dragon will see you next week, where I rank all the Bioshock games from the worst to the best. I'm sure those comments will be very civil. I'll see you then.